Stanley Wilson was supposed to carry the ball for the Bengals in Super Bowl 23. He scored 2 touchdowns in the team's first playoff game.
Stanley Wilson had it all. A big NFL career, fame, money, and fans who believed he was unstoppable. But in the end, his downfall came crashing down with one terrible mistake. He wasn't just banned from the NFL for 3 years. He was caught stealing over $130,000 in property from a place in Beverly Hills. It was the kind of scandal you'd expect in a movie, not real life. As a fullback for the Cincinnati Bengals, Wilson was primed for greatness. His raw talent, combined with his ability to power through tough conditions, made him one of the more dependable players on the team. But tragically, his story was never just about football. Behind the scenes, Wilson was locked in a battle with a cocaine addiction, an illness that the NFL in those days was still learning how to handle. Wilson's drug use led to multiple suspensions, marking his career as much as his talent on the field did. When the Bengals suspended him for the entire 1985 and 1987 seasons, he faced enormous pressure to stay clean, but it was a battle he struggled with. It's hard not to wonder if more resources and support for athletes struggling with addiction could have changed his story. But in the 1980s, the conversation around mental health and addiction in sports was barely beginning. The league's approach was strict and often unforgiving, as many felt it had to be. But one can't help but wonder how things might have been different if Wilson had the kind of support systems available to today's players. The most heart-wrenching moment in Wilson's career came in 1989, just before Super Bowl 23. For any NFL player, a Super Bowl appearance is the ultimate dream, a moment that could cement a legacy and bring glory to everything they'd worked hard for. But just the night before this monumental game, Wilson succumbed to his addiction. He told his teammates he needed to grab his playbook, left the meeting, and never came back. Instead, his coach found him in the bathroom, high on cocaine and completely removed from the world around him. It's easy to be angry or frustrated when you hear about this moment. How could he throw everything away, especially then? But addiction is rarely rational. In the moment, Wilson's need for that high overshadowed everything else. The Bengals made the difficult choice to leave him off the roster for the game. This decision may have impacted their chances. In fact, former Bengals coach Sam Wyche later argued that missing Wilson was a major loss. The field was muddy that night, a condition that would have suited Wilson's style perfectly. The Bengals ended up losing to the 49ers in a close game, and you can't help but wonder if having Wilson might have tipped the scales even slightly. But football, like life, is full of what-ifs. What's certain is that this moment was a turning point that took Wilson from being a talented player on the rise to a cautionary tale in NFL history. Once he was banned for life under the NFL's drug policy, Wilson's life quickly spiraled. Without football as his anchor, he struggled to find a sense of purpose. He tried rehab several times, but the power of addiction continued to drag him down. There was even a point where his lawyer claimed Wilson was ready to unveil a so-called shroud of truth about drug use among other Bengals players. Whether this was a genuine attempt at disclosure or an empty threat remains unclear, but it was ultimately an unfulfilled promise, adding another layer of mystery to his story. Wilson's life took another tragic turn in 1999 when he was arrested for breaking into a Beverly Hills home and stealing over $130,000 worth of property to support his drug habit. This wasn't a small offense. It was a desperate act by a man who had lost control. In court, his attorney argued that he suffered from bipolar disorder, a condition that often goes hand in hand with addiction, making the struggle to stay clean that much harder. Despite his lawyer's arguments, the judge sentenced him to 22 years in prison. At this point, it seemed like Wilson's story would end behind bars, with only a shadow of the once promising football star left to tell the tale. For a long time, it seemed his story had reached its final chapter. But then, in the early 2010s, Wilson was released from prison. He had spent over a decade reflecting on his choices, his past, and his addiction. The world he returned to was vastly different, and the bright lights of NFL stardom were long behind him. Moving to Wisconsin, Wilson sought a quieter, more stable life. He found peace with his family, living with his wife and 2 children. These days, he manages his mental health with medication, and by all accounts, he's working hard to stay grounded and steady. It's bittersweet, honestly. On one hand, there's something admirable about the fact that he's managed to build a new life after everything he's been through. Addiction and mental illness are incredibly difficult battles, and coming out the other side, especially after so many years, is a victory in itself. But on the other hand, it's hard not to think about the NFL career that could have been. Imagine what he might have achieved if things had turned out differently. Wilson could have been remembered as a powerhouse fullback, a Super Bowl champion, maybe even a legend in the league. Instead, he's remembered as a player who, through his own choices and struggles, threw it all away. As of 2024, Wilson's life is quiet and, for the first time, stable. He lives with the consequences of his past choices, but is finally at peace, far from the chaotic highs and lows of his younger years. For Wilson, the years of fame are long gone, and what's left is a quieter kind of success, one built on sobriety, stability, and the love of his family. Speaking of his time with the NFL, Wilson's journey to the NFL wasn't a typical story of overnight success. It was a journey filled with promise, hard work, and early achievements that would have made any athlete proud. He started his football career at Banning High School in Los Angeles, where his talent quickly became undeniable. Wilson was named Player of the Year in both 1978 and 1979, and for good reason. He was a standout, a player who seemed destined for something big. His high school success was just the beginning of what looked like a promising football career. After high school, Wilson took his talents to the University of Oklahoma, where he played college football for the Oklahoma Sooners. It was at Oklahoma where his skills really began to shine. He rushed for an impressive 3,068 yards and scored 14 touchdowns during his college career, numbers that turned heads and caught the attention of NFL scouts. His ability to power through defenses and rack up yards made him one of the top running backs in college football, and by the time he finished his college career, he was considered one of the most promising players coming into the NFL. In 1983, the Cincinnati Bengals took a chance on Wilson, drafting him in the 9th round. Even though he wasn't picked in the early rounds, there was still a lot of hope and excitement surrounding him. Wilson's journey to the NFL wasn't just about talent, it was about determination. Over the next 6 seasons, he played in 36 games, making a name for himself as a reliable fullback. Wilson had his ups and downs, but there was always potential. He showed flashes of greatness on the field, earning a reputation for being a hard runner who could push through tough defenses. As much as he was making his mark on the field, Wilson was facing another, much darker struggle off it. Despite his success, addiction was always lurking in the background. In the mid-1980s, Wilson's addiction to cocaine started to take control of his life. This led to a suspension for the entire 1985 season. He was given another shot in 1986, but by 1987, he was once again suspended for violating the NFL's drug policy. It was clear that his battle with addiction was taking a toll on his career, and despite his talent, it was hard for him to stay focused on football. The most dramatic and heartbreaking moment came in 1989, just days before Super Bowl 23. The Bengals were about to face the San Francisco 49ers in one of the biggest games of their lives, but Wilson's struggles with cocaine resurfaced at the worst possible time. The night before the game, Wilson told his teammates that he needed to grab his playbook and disappeared. When his coach went looking for him, he found Wilson in the bathroom high on cocaine just hours before the biggest game of his career. The Bengals had no choice but to leave him off the roster for the Super Bowl. That incident wasn't just a career setback, it was the final blow. After the Super Bowl incident, Wilson was banned from the NFL for life due to his third violation of the league's drug policy. His career, which had shown so much potential, came to a sudden and tragic end. In the blink of an eye, Wilson's promising career was over. He went from being a rising star in the NFL to a cautionary tale of addiction and lost opportunities. His time with the Bengals and in the NFL is a reminder of how quickly things can change, especially when addiction takes control. That brings us to the end of our video. How about you subscribe if you haven't already?